Well, good afternoon. I'm Father Ron Culmer. Actually, I should say good evening. I'm Father Ron Culmer, and I am the rector of St. Clare's Episcopal Church in Pleasanton. I'm your chaplain this evening as we prepare to do an evening meditation for camp. I'm so glad to be with you. I'll never forget the first time that I came to St. Dorothy's Rest. Um, I was a young man, and it was in seminary, and I had never even heard of St. Dorothy's Rest, had never been there. And when I got there, I was surprised by all the wonderful redwoods that make that place what it is. But I was also a little unnerved by my experience there at night. It was not something I experienced on a day-to-day basis. Unless you live in a forest, I bet you probably don't experience that as well. In this time that we're living, where we're dealing with viruses and uprisings and whatnot, I imagine you find that these times can be difficult for you too, that you might be feeling anxious or concerned. And I even bet that when you um, come to camp, whenever you came to camp, and especially for the first time, and you were there at night, you probably found it a little unnerving. In fact, even if you had a flashlight with all those big trees, with St. Dorothy's being there in the dark, it's unnerving. It can trouble you. What do you do when you're scared? What do you do to make yourself feel good, to feel safe? What does it take? For me, part of where I find myself feeling safe and good and whole is knowing that God is with me. A poet by the name of Wendell Berry, he talks about that same sort of thing. He says something along the lines of, "At night, when I am fearful of the world and I fear about what could happen to me and my family," he says, "I go to the place where the wood drake finds its rest, and I look up at the stars, and the peace of the wilderness comes to me." That's an interesting thing to say, isn't it? That the peace of the wilderness comes to me. You know, it's no accident that the camp is called St. Dorothy's Rest. And that rest certainly is in the wilderness, but it's also a rest that's found in God. How do we find rest in God? Well, again, coming back to the wilderness, what's interesting is that there are creatures that know something about rest. Have you ever watched how a duck who is walking on land and has trouble on land sort of waddles? They move back and forth unevenly, but then when they get into the water, they glide in. And there's this relationship. The water upholds and buoys the duck. And the duck who has difficulty on land is magnificent in the water. Oh, sure, those little feet are paddling underneath. But there are times where the duck also just sits there, and even though the waves come and the waves go, the duck is surrounded and supported by the water. That's what God's peace is like. Sure, the waves may come and may go, but the peace of God, knowing that God is near, knowing that God loves us, even in the midst of the times in which we're afraid, can buoy and support us. Long ago, I was taught this song, and in this evening, I want you to take and keep this for yourself. The song goes like this. Nahi peace I give unto you. It's a peace that the world cannot give. It's a peace that the world cannot understand. Peace to know, peace to live. My peace I give unto you. In those times when you feel anxious or concerned or afraid, remember the peace of wild things. Remember the peace, the rest of St. Dorothy's rest. Remember the peace of God. Thank you for joining.